What's up, y'all? Just wanted to share some of my thoughts and reactions to Chapter 269 because a lot of people have been talking about it. So let's get into it. Spoilers. And off rip, let's just address the Disney Kaisen allegations. And I don't have a problem with people that say this because, yeah, a lot less people have been murked than we thought, right? Higuruma and kusakabe are both alive. Now, personally, I didn't really think either of them are dead, but we've talked about it maybe a couple times in random videos over the past several months. But I know that's not going to mean much to you guys because I've also been, talking about Gojo potentially coming back. So that didn't really stand out to me. There's ways to do the fake out deaths that I think are cheap. And I'm not saying that Gege didn't enter into that territory, but like he also always left the door open, especially in Kusakabe's case. Like, did anyone really think Kusakabe was dead? But I've heard people complaining about that one. Higuruma makes more sense, but as we know, we and Kirara were there instantly to get him out, and he wasn't quite 50% discounted, the same way we saw Gojo and Yuta get. So I always thought that there was a chance that Higuruma was going to be okay. So that didn't bother me about this chapter, but I do understand people who love JJK for its darkness and the fact that it does kill characters being upset by that, and I think that's perfectly fair. But again, for me, it wasn't that big of a deal. Next, I liked this chapter. I really enjoyed it, in fact. I love a good yapter. That means we're finding out a lot of information. And honestly, I'm really surprised by people who were surprised by this chapter and didn't like it. Like, we are in the final 3 chapters, right? We are in the falling action and resolution of this series. We aren't about to have like 6 more epic battles, right? So this is par for the course for me, and I really just appreciated the whole kind of Maki being a stand-in for the audience, and also just for Gege to kind of air out these things that he knows people are going to ask, answering these questions that I just promise you, if this chapter did not exist, for the rest of JJK's discourse, it would be like, Gege is a trash writer, the characters are stupid, why didn't Inumaki just tell Sukuna to stop when Higuruma had the sword, and, insert any of the other 6 circumstances that they explicitly addressed here. So thank you, Gege, for that, so that we don't have to listen to that for the rest of time now. So I appreciated this, and not only did that serve like the meta function of kind of talking to Gege's critics, but it also served as a catharsis for the characters themselves. You got to remember that they are fresh off a literal terrorist attack. Now, again, cite back to the Disney Kaisen allegations, you might say, well, oh yeah, well, not that many people died. People still died, right? Including a lot of civilians. Like, again, terrorism is the word that is most apt for the situation they have been living through for the past however long, right? So they are just in the immediate come down of this, and Maki is being like, hey, like, why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do this? Like, we could have fixed these things, which is such a natural human response, right? And we also have Kusakabe kind of saying that same thing with like, yeah, if Gojo had just killed Yuji, then we wouldn't have had to deal with any of this. Like, it was all very human to me. And so once again, I feel like this makes perfect sense for the ending of this series. We are getting this dialogue. We are getting kind of this airing out of everybody coming to grips with what they've just dealt with. And like I mentioned, the added benefit of kind of answering some of the meta questions as well. And then on top of that, we get the whole sequence at the end with the new Shadow Style School and Kusakabe and Meimei, and I find that incredibly fascinating. Like, I'm sure you guys, if you've seen my videos, have heard me talk about one of the things I wish we got more of in JJK was its world building, because I thought Gege had made such a very interesting system. And that's exactly what the final part of this chapter was. We found out about the clan head and these binding vows of like why you couldn't teach simple domain to other people, and that is the type of lore that I just eat up. Now, I've already put out a video explaining all of that because it was very confusing in the initial translations. So if you haven't seen my videos talking about that and you were still confused about all of that stuff at the end of the chapter, check it out. But yeah, I found that really interesting. And then for the whole gojo stuff, I did think it was really strange, and I think that's the perfect word for it. Strange that he wasn't addressed, his name wasn't mentioned. I guess it was technically mentioned, but the whole situation wasn't addressed, especially considering we dealt with Yuta returning to his body. Like, where's Gojo's body? What happened with that? I do fully expect us to get some resolution on this in the final 2 chapters. I'm not saying he's going to come back for certain or anything like that, but there's something still to happen with this. I can feel it. So anyways, yeah, I enjoyed the chapter. I'm excited for these final 2, but let me know what you guys thought. Was it too Disney Kaisen for you? Are you not here for the yapters? Let me know. And then for the rest of this video, I'm going to be tackling some questions, starting with these from Emil. Thank you so much for the generous donation, man. But this first one here says, how powerful would a fully realized Higuruma be if he survives? And you were prophetic, because this question came in before chapter 269. So let us know what's going to happen in 270, man. But I think Higuruma is a beast. You know, grade 1 sorcerer, easy. He can't be a special grade just due to the nature of his technique. He's not taking on a whole country, but he's got domain expansion, domain amplification, RCT. Like, he's an absolute beast that I think 1v1 can take a lot of people on. But do I have an idea for a maximum technique for him? Not really, just because his technique is interwoven with his domain. So I don't know how like a maximum technique outside of the domain would work, but maybe he could only continue to facilitate growing and refining his domain. Like, maybe he could find a way to narrow down and specifically choose the certain crime somebody would be charged with or something like that. And then your second question is, how do you think that Yuji would have evolved differently if he did soul swap training with Gojo and Choso instead? You personally think he would have been a lot stronger, since Gojo would have been able to teach him basically everything, right? Because he's Gojo. So I think the reason they didn't do this is because, yes, he's Gojo, he's the honored one, but he's not a great teacher, first of all. And 2, his body comes with the 6 eyes, right? So that's like a whole other language, if we want to put it that way. You know, you're trying to learn advanced English, and then when you go to Gojo, you're learning German instead, right? So I think the fact that you have the 6 eyes, the process for these things is just so vastly different. It doesn't necessarily translate to when you're back in your own body, right? If you're getting the efficiency of the 6 eyes, and that is how you learn how to do some of these things, when you go back to, you know, your beginner course in your own body, it's probably going to feel foreign. So I think that's probably why most people didn't swap with Gojo. We only know that he swapped with Yuta. Could he have swapped with somebody else? Maybe, but I think the only reason he did swap with Yuta was because of the plan for Yuta to pilot his body, getting him some, you know, just base level experience with that. So I think that Yuji's swaps were the best he could have had, because he intentionally needed to learn simple domain and RCT, and he was able to learn those 2 things from like their respective masters, essentially, right? So I don't think this would have gone better for him necessarily, but the Choso is a really good point. He obviously could have learned a lot about blood manipulation from him. But again, I think it just cycles back to the important things Yuji needed to get there were simple domain and RCT. Next up, we got this from Hippity Hop, who is a YouTube member. So shout out to you. But y'all pause to read this because there's no real question here. Hippity is just saying that they liked how Gege used this chapter to speak directly to the audience. And as I already mentioned, you know I'm totally with you there. Next up, we got this one from Mythic Ranger, and it's a bit longer, so y'all pause to read it, but it deals with Gojo, and he thinks it's a bit weird that Gojo wasn't touched on much in this chapter, and you know, I'm right there with you. But he also brings up how the clock from 269 is at the time 221, and chapter 221 just so happens to be when Gojo gets out of the prison realm. So could that be a little bit of, you know, subtle symbolism and foreshadowing, a little bit of cheeky parallel that Gege is setting up? I definitely think that's possible. I mean, in the previous chapter, I talked about the clock being 8 minutes off, right? And Gojo was 8 minutes late in chapter 3. So I certainly think that could be there. It doesn't have to be, but, you know, the fact that he drew that clock at specifically that time, like, if I was, you know, an author telling a story, those are the types of like fun details I would like to put in. But again, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. Maybe nothing, but I'm certainly on the same page with you that this could be leading to something. And again, I fully believe we will get something more with Gojo's resolution in these final 2 chapters. Like, we have to. Now, again, that doesn't mean he's going to just walk through the door all hunky-dory, completely fine. Maybe he will, but I just think we're going to get some resolution with this still. Anyways, one thing you do mention though is the whole simple domain and life extending parts of those binding vows. I don't think that has anything to do with gojo. So if you haven't already, check out my explanation for the end of 269. I think that's just related to the new Shadow Style School, which I know gojo knows simple domain, but the life extension stuff was just for the clan head, not for like people who are in the new Shadow Style School. Next up, Cartier Crisis asks, how strong would a fully awakened Yuji be if he mastered his techniques? And this comment comes on a video where I talk about how strong Yuji is at the end of the series. So check that out if you didn't see that. But in that video, I call him special grade level. I think he's there. I think he can take on a country. So then from there, if he then masters his techniques, I think he's the strongest in the verse. I mean, Gojo and Sukuna are out of the picture. So like, could Yuji theoretically surpass them? I do think it's possible. I mean, this kid is what, 16 years old and he's already at the level he's at. I know Gojo and Sukuna are just so different than everyone else, but give Yuji 20 years, right? Like, what's he going to look like when he's Gojo's age? So I do think in a hypothetical scenario where he masters his techniques over the next 20 years and continues to train and stuff, yeah, Yuji's #1. Next up, we got another one from a YouTube member, the legend Tiberius, and he says, just a fun thought. Miwa jumped in, which saved Maki, but Miwa took a grenade. It does not, gamble, does not say grenade, but that would have been incredible. Remember, Miwa may still need her binding vow of keeping her feet planted, but luckily she had Maki holding her in place. Yes, that was amazing. And I love that moment for so many reasons. First, we get Miwa actually being useful, beating the allegations, right? And on top of that, we got the hard confirmation that Todo used her to swap Maki, something I have been asked more than a few times, but now we know for sure that that was the plan there. Next up, I got a really special donation here from Lamb that is not only insanely generous, but is incredibly kind. And y'all can pause to read it if you'd like. But I just want to say, man, thank you so much. That truly means a lot to me. I am honored that I get to kind of be a part of y'all's journey with Jujutsu Kaisen and, anime and manga or, whatever we're just yapping about on any given day. I truly am honored that like I get to be somebody's, video they throw on while they're eating or while they're falling asleep or, because that's something I do all the time. And so it's really cool to think that like I get to be a part of other people's lives in that way and just know that that really means a lot to me. So thank you so much for the kind words, man. Yeah, thank you so much. And then I also want to address what you say in the second half here because I so relate to this. I too have like really cool ideas, at least I think they're cool, but I have zero ability to translate them to an artistic work, and I really wish I could. I'm so envious of artists' skill to be able to do that. So like you mentioned here, I would say join the Discord if you haven't. We have a great community of artists there. You might be able to find somebody to collaborate with, but at the very least, I know a lot of our artists do have open commissions for anybody that's looking for some work or a piece to be made. Next up, we got a couple questions from Jawan here, starting with why didn't Sukuna realize that there was a finger already in Yuji from the very beginning? And this is a great question. And I think that Sukuna did realize at least far earlier than we, the audience, were told. I think Sukuna knew that before that chapter where it was revealed. But I think he didn't know in chapter 1 when this first happened because it was sealed within Yuji. So it probably wasn't until Kenjaku lifted the seal on that finger that Sukuna would have put 2 and 2 together. And perhaps he did that at the end of the Shibuya incident when he lifted the seals on all of the other Culling Games players, or perhaps it just happened at any random time. But I do think Sukuna knew before we found out. And then to address your question of if Sukuna did know this information, then he wouldn't have gotten fooled as to his 20th finger being missing. And I'm glad you asked this because I do get asked questions about this a lot. That 20th finger is not the one that was in Yuji. So that is just one of the 19 that we had already accounted for. The 20th finger was a separate one entirely. That's the one that Gojo hid, and Sukuna knew that. So he just thought when Yuta used Cleave that Yuta must have eaten it, and that's how they tricked him. But in fact, it wasn't because Yuta had copied it from Yuji. And then finally, do we know the sorcerer that Sukuna said Yuji reminded him of from 1,000 years ago? I think we got a little John Weary effect going on right here. If you're referring to this where Sukuna looks at Yuji and says, they remind me of someone I knew 1,000 years ago, that's actually not what he meant. The more accurate translation is Sukuna just saying, people fought me just like this 1,000 years ago. Next up, we got this generous donation from Blue Eyed King, who also happens to be a YouTube member. Shout out to you, legend. But he says, what are my thoughts on if Sukuna had to fight Gojo, but Gojo had Mahoraga? I assume that's what you're saying here. And in that case, I think Gojo has even better odds because I've put out videos on this before. Gojo versus Sukuna without the 10 shadows, I think is a toss-up, a coin flip. I think either one can win. So if we're instead going to give Gojo Mahoraga, then I think that just pushes it in his favor and he wins like 80% of the time. That's going to do it for this one, y'all. Thank you guys so much for the kindness and the support. It truly does mean the world to me, and thank you so much for watching.